Many football fans of today may not be familiar with the name Third Lanark AC, but they were hugely influential in the development of the game, and once even reigned supreme as champions of Scotland. But tragically, thanks to the actions of one man, they went out of business in the 1960s and have become lost in time. This is a story of Third Lanark, the club Scotland left behind. Third Lanark were founded in 1872 as the representatives of the 3rd Lanarkshire Rifle Volunteers, a regiment set up in Glasgow to protect Great Britain should Napoleon Bonaparte ever decide to invade. They had decided to form after recently seeing Scotland take on England in the first ever international fixture. They reached the final of the Scottish Cup in 1876 and 1878, and were hoping to be third time lucky in 1889 when they faced Celtic. Initially, snow fell, and the two Glaswegian sides agreed under the circumstances that they would play friendly and do the cup final another time when the conditions were better. The referee Charles Campbell, however, said otherwise, as he felt the supporters deserved a cup final, as that is what they had turned up to see. Third Lanark would win 3-0, but after Celtic complained to Scottish FA, a replay was held, and Third Lanark repeated the trick by winning 2-1. In 1890, they would be a founding member of the Scottish Football League. By now, they had moved into a home of New Cathkin Park, which had once housed Queen's Park. It was renovated to seat up to 50,000 spectators and were going to host the first Old Firm Scottish Cup final. In 1904, they had their finest moment as they won the Scottish League Championship, and the next year there was further glory as they won their second Scottish Cup, defeating Rangers 3-1 in a replay. Shortly before the First World War, Third Lanark ventured abroad, touring Spain and Portugal and playing many local sides. Like many though, they lost several players in the trenches, but the other side of the war saw them hugely influence the game. Their former player, Colonel John Wilson, was now their chairman, and in 1921 he arranged for the side to sail across the Atlantic and play against teams from America and Canada. The tour proved successful, and 2 years later they would be travelling to the other side of the equator to tour South America. The club had some spaces to fill, and so guest players were brought in from Motherwell, Hamilton, Raith, Falkirk, Clyde and Alloa. Many back in Scotland felt Third Lanark lacked the resources for such tours, but their arrival in Argentina was much anticipated, as they had not seen a British side on tour there since Exeter City in 1914. Thousands of fans poured into Buenos Aires as Third Lanark arrived after 3 weeks at sea, to face a combined XI of northern Argentinian teams at the home of River Plate. A large sign saying, "Welcome to a Scotchman," was held up by the locals. The long time at sea had shaken up the Scots, who lost the first game 1-0. They improved to win their second game, and while some said they were inspiring the Argentines, there were also reports of locals throwing missiles at the players, and one local newspaper accused goalkeeper Tom Ferguson of covering his hands with pega-pega, a sticky substance used for catching birds, so that he could control the ball better. Third Lanark crossed the border to face Uruguay and drew 1-1. They later drew 1-1 with the Argentina national team and finished the tour with a 2-1 win over a combined Argentina and Uruguay XI. They left South America with 4 wins, 2 draws and 2 defeats. Legendary Motherwell striker Hughie Ferguson netted 8 goals overall on the tour. Sadly though, after the tour, their fortunes slid. They were relegated for the first time in 1925 and became a yo-yo club, experiencing 3 promotions and 3 relegations over the next decade. In 1936, they reached the Scottish Cup final, losing 1-0 to Rangers, but hopes are high this could be the start of their rebirth. Sadly, this would prove to be their last appearance at the showpiece event. Their momentum was destroyed by the start of the Second World War, and on the other side of it, when they were struggling to start again, the Argentine FA sent them a set of fresh kits and balls as a thank you for the influence they had given the Argentinian game. In the 1950s, the club won 2 Glasgow Charity Cups, and were also overtaken by local businessman Bill Hiddleston. Hiddleston was eventually booted off the board after a series of financial irregularities, as well as sanctioning a new signing without consulting the board. The club experienced a rise in fortune and appointed George Young as manager. They reached the 1959 League Cup final, losing to Hearts, and in 1961 they finished 3rd in the top flight, scoring an incredible 100 goals, a tally reached by defeating Hibs 6-1 on the final day. A tour of the US and Canada was arranged, and Cathkin Park was seeing fans arrive in their droves. However, things soon went downhill again. Bill Hiddleston returned to the club as majority shareholder, and George Young immediately resigned, along with other members of the board who remarked, "God save Third Lanark." Third Lanark were relegated in the mid-1960s, after Hiddleston had sacked 19 players, which saw attendances decline all the way down to the hundreds. Many players had moved on, and managers came and went, whilst the cost-cutting hit ridiculous levels, along with money the club was receiving constantly going missing. The funds raised by supporters would always disappear, and prize money from club raffles was not paid out. The players were often paid late, in coins that were squeezed out of turnstile profits. Opposition teams would turn up with their own light bulbs and soap, balls were painted with white to look new, and when their player John Kinnaird was sent to hospital after breaking his arm, Hiddleston demanded the doctor did not cut off his shirt, as the club could not afford a new one. It was felt by many that Hiddleston was trying to make the club fall into liquidation so that he could sell their ground to property developers. Supporters stopped going as they didn't want to give Hiddleston their money, and shareholders were no longer interested. The club's debts were mounting, and the supporters demanded an investigation. The final game at Cathkin Park was a 3-3 draw of Queen of the South, in front of 325 spectators, and Third Lanark's final ever game was a 5-1 away defeat to Dumbarton in April 1967. It later emerged the club had offered the land to the Glasgow Corporation to sell Cathkin Park for housing, and that summer the club was given a winding up order, and the membership of the Scottish League was revoked. By now, many players had bought out their contracts, and on the 7th of July 1967, Lord Fraser reached the conclusion that Third Lanark's debts were greater than the value of their assets, and he had no choice but to liquidate them. Bill Hiddleston took his money and ran to Lancashire with his family, but he ultimately escaped justice. In December 1967, he died of a heart attack. The subsequent investigation found that Hiddleston was guilty of blatant corruption and that he had used club funds to pave over the driveway at his home, along with other personal expenses. 4 other members of the board were found guilty of failing to keep the club's finances updated and were fined £100 each. The planning permission for Cathkin Park was ultimately denied, and today the stadium stands abandoned, with the ghosts of one of the Scottish League's founding fathers haunting the stands. What happened to Third Lanark is a great tragedy. A club who had helped create the Scottish League, defeated both of the Old Firm sides in Scottish Cup finals, and influenced all the great footballing nations in Argentina, are now nothing but memories. A revived Third Lanark were founded in 2008, but play in the amateur leagues, and will never reach the heights of the team that came before them. A great historical team was lost thanks to the greed and corruption of one man, who took his answers to the grave. So much history is lost because of the actions of Bill Hiddleston, and were it not for him, Third Lanark could well remain up there, with Hearts, Hibs, Rangers, Aberdeen, Dundee United and Celtic as well as Scotland's great clubs. Sadly though, all that is left is a legacy of corruption amongst a crumbling ground covered in moss and cobwebs, as one is left to wonder what might have been.